Today we're going to continue learning about the Islamic empires of the early modern era. Previously, we learned about the Ottomans in the Mediterranean basin, North Africa, and Southwest Asia. However, today we are not going to continue with the Ottomans. We are going to be learning about the rise and the beginning of the fall of the Mughal Empire in South Asia. Well, what does that mean? What are the foundations? Let us explore and move on. The foundation of the Mughal Empire obviously goes back farther, but one key individual, right, with his soldiers and other individuals is Zahir al-Din Muhammad Babur the Tiger from the Shaddadid Turks, which are vestiges of the Mongols. His wonderful use of gunpowder, which is right here, allows him to take into the region of northwest South Asia into Lahore, and he founds the Mughal Dynasty, which will eventually expand throughout the majority of the subcontinent of South Asia. Who's next? Next individual on this would be Akbar. Akbar's procession to power, last. There's many infamous, and wonderful things that happen under Akbar's rule. I would like to juxtapose in this image, you see an elephant carrying him in the procession. I'd like to put that in the last image, of this PowerPoint and show the transition of power in South Asia. Well, Akbar, he was the grandson of Babur, created a centralized government, destroys the Hindu kingdom of Vijayanagar, becomes a tolerant religious ruler, creates a syncretic form of Islam, Jism, and gets rid of the Jizya. Well, what a great guy. Well, the region that he changed, is down here in Vijayanagar. He kind of disbands this and creates Hindu regional princes, which creates an opening for the next ruler. So, moving forward to the next ruler of this time is this individual right here. You get Aurangzeb, 1659 to 1707. He expands the Mughal Empire to southern India. However, he is hostile to Hinduism. He destroys temples, replaces them with mosques. The Mughals were Muslim rulers. He also reinserts the Jizya on Hindus, and we will see a map which shows the growth of this through the three rulers. Initially, you have up in here under Babur the initial parts of the Mughal Empire up to 1525, then expanding southward under Akbar up to 1605, and then further Aurangzeb down here, by 1707. Most of the subcontinent is ruled by the Mughals. Let us go through, see a different part of this, and hear different words on these individuals and the rise of the Mughal Empire.
So the Mughals were Muslims who created an empire in India that held power for roughly 200 years between the early 16th and early 18th centuries, although technically the Mughal Empire didn't come to an end until after the Indian Rebellion against the British in 1857. Now the Mughals weren't the first Muslims in India, those would have been merchants, and they weren't even the first Muslims to rule significant parts of India. That honor goes to the Delhi Sultanate, which began in 1206 in northern India. But the Delhi Sultanate didn't last very long and was replaced by a bunch of regional kingdoms, and one of them, the Lodi Sultanate, had the misfortune of falling to the founder of the Mughal Dynasty, Babur, in 1526. Not Babar, although that would have been awesome. Babur was descended from Timur, the last great Central Asian conqueror in the Mongol tradition, and also from Chinggis Khan, which explains why Babur and his followers are called the Mughals. It's the Persian Arabic word for Mongols. Now, I know what you're saying, something like 12% of human beings currently living in the world are descended from Chinggis Khan, but Babur got in on the ground floor of it. Anyway, I think we have some footage of Babur raiding the Lodi Sultanate, don't we, Stan? Nah, I don't feel like that was actual file footage from 1206. I feel like that was a racist Hercules movie from Italy in the 1950s. So the Mughal Empire is really important in India's cultural history. I mean, the Taj Mahal was built during this time. In architecture and painting, we see a blending of Indian and Persian styles that demonstrate how cosmopolitan the empire was. But probably the most important aspect of the Mughals, at least as far as the contemporary world is concerned, is that they consolidated Muslim rule over much of India, and they're largely the reason that today there are so many Indians who are also also Muslims. And the Mughals were also a really interesting example of like how to build and maintain an empire. All right, let's go to the thought bubble. Muslims were a small minority ruling class vastly outnumbered by Hindus, and like many empires, they relied on military power and pursued expansionist policies. Like most of the Mughal rulers, especially Akbar and Aurangzeb, spent a considerable amount of time trying to extend Mughal control over the entire Indian subcontinent, and they created a pretty effective empire. They were able to incorporate Indian princes into the ruling class while still retaining top positions for Muslims. They reorganized the bureaucracy and instituted an effective tax collection system, which was important because the empire was, of course, very expensive to run, as empires always are. This meant it was important to make accurate tax assessments, and taxes were usually collected by local leaders called zamindars. Taxes had to be paid in cash, and this contributed to the growing commercialization of the Mughal Empire. Reliance on zamindars, who were important men in their communities, meant that the empire could collect revenue without being too disruptive to local village life. And although almost all of the revenue came from taxes on agriculture, the Mughals also taxed trade. Another way that the Mughals were a typical empire is that their rulers engaged in building projects to enhance their prestige. From Persepolis to Rome to the Forbidden City, building monuments to one's greatness is what emperors do, and the Mughals were no exception. As Muslims, many of their building projects were mosques, but the Mughals also built forts and, most spectacularly, mausoleums. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So most history classes that mention the Mughals focus on the contrast between Akbar and Aurangzeb. Akbar comes off as a good ruler, and Aurangzeb is painted as the guy who ruined the empire. The typically positive historian's view of Akbar, who ruled from 1556 until 1605, can be summed up in this quote from Asher and Talbot's India Before Europe. Through his reforms of administration and taxation, Akbar created a sound and enduring foundation for Mughal.
Hold on one second. We will go back to that. Sorry.
So the Mughals were Muslims who created an empire.
Find this. Sorry.
Talbot's India Before Europe. Through his reforms of administration and taxation, Akbar created a sound and enduring foundation for Mughal governance, while his tolerant attitude and inclusive policies toward Hindus and Jains helped create a state that was more Indian in character. That tolerance aspect is especially important. Like Akbar rescinded the jizya, the tax that non-Muslims had to pay, and in 1580 he gave all non-Muslims the same rights as Muslims, instituting a policy called sul-i-kul, which translates to universal toleration. Now, in part, this policy was designed to lessen the power of Muslim religious scholars who might have been disturbed by the way that Akbar blended Islamic and Indian ideas of kingship, especially the idea that he was, kind of a little bit divine. Slightly problematic idea to a lot of Muslim scholars, given that the foundation of the Islamic faith is the statement there is no God but God, but In addition to the sul-i-kul, Akbar built his reputation for toleration by sponsoring discussions of religion and philosophy. He even commissioned a building for religious discussions, the Ibadat Khana, where Muslims and Brahmins and Zoroastrians, Jains, Christians, all of them could talk theology. Akbar's support for intellectual pursuits are the kinds of things that modern historians like, and it's not all that surprising that he's remembered so favorably. Historians are far less kind to Akbar's grandson, Aurangzeb, who ruled from 1658 until 1707. This is partly due to the work of J. N. Sakar, who promoted the idea that Aurangzeb built an Islamic state that discriminated against Hindus and other non-Muslims, which in turn led to a loss of unity across the Indian subcontinent and eventually the decline of the empire. And it's true that by the time of Aurangzeb's death in 1707, the Mughals were losing control over their empire. I mean, the stark reality of that decline came in 1757 when the British East India Company established itself permanently in Bengal and began its inexorable efforts to colonize all of India.
All right, so let's move forward. Well, under the Mughals, you have agricultural and trade. It's still the trade emporia of the Indian Ocean basin, which it was, right, during the post-classical, still is the early modern. They're still producing pepper and turmeric, right? They have a massive cotton textile industry, which is meeting the world's needs, especially in the Bengal region. You have a double growth, roughly, of this. This has to do for several global reasons of movement of food, stability, whatnot. However, the new thing coming in, right, in the early modern era is the trade with the East India companies, whether it's the French, the Dutch, VOC, or the English. Big changes. You saw in Aurangzeb losing control, but also this has to do with European meddling, I would say, to a degree. Here in this image, right, you can see, right, Europeans trading here. These are all European ships trading with South Asia. As you see down here, a fort, but it's European in nature with some other things. These other images, yes, you have more European ships, but they're all trading on either the west coast, the Malabar, or the east coast, the Coromandel of South Asia. The English start on the west coast of South Asia and the Malabar coastline in Calicut, right, where Vasco da Gama visited in 1600. And then on the east coast, especially Madras, is the French India Company. Well, let us move forward on this. Moving forward, we still are going to be looking at some other things. The decline. This will go rather quickly because I want to wrap this up. Foreign trade controlled by Europeans, which you saw earlier, is happening more and more. And it's decreasing. The Mughals control because local Hindu, right, along with some Muslim, right, regional powers are getting more power financially, which stresses, right, administrative network. And then, therefore, they're paying less money getting it. It's harder to go. You also have technological advances, which the Mughals are not keeping up with. In this image, I like, it exhibits this. It's showing in the Deccan Plateau, which is central South Asia. Right here, right, you have an Indian, right, Subhabar, which is a local, like, sultan or prince, is meeting with the French East India Company. This is happening on the west coast, the Coromandel coast. But it shows this transition of power. There is no like subservience here. I would almost argue, obviously this is a French-made thing, showing the French in control over the local power, but it's a French document. So moving forward into our last area on here, we have, I like to exhibit, and here, this transition. Notice in this image, right, this is 1757, Robert Clive with Mir Jafar, right here. Okay, sorry about that little technical delay. Right here we have, right, Robert Clive, English 1757 with Mir Jafar. Right here, right, they are accepting terms between each other on English and Mir Jafar's defeat of the Mughals. However, notice in this image, this is English, right? Look at the elephant's face. It looks disgruntled, and you have a victorious horse over here. Very interesting to me. So once again, a disgruntled image of South Asia, which is an elephant for power at this time. Now let us go all the way back to the first image of Akbar's, right, succession to power is right here. Stay with me. Look at this one right here. You have a victorious, powerful elephant. By 1757, the East India Companies are reigning power, right, on South Asia and create divide. This can be wonderfully summed up. Let me get to the last slide here, and we will be done with this part of the Mughals. From this quote from After Tamerlane from George Darwin. Under the stress of social and economic as well as political change, Mughal power was breaking down or mutating into looser regime, coexisting with the new sub-empire scrambling for territory, trade, and revenue. In maritime India, there was a similar threat. Here, the agent of change was the rapid expansion of commercial economy and overseas trade. New wealth and new revenues gave regional sub-rulers more and more freedom from Mughal supervision and made them less and less willing to pay tribute they owed. But this growing autonomy came with a price. Would-be state builders had to keep a close watch on the merchants and bankers who funded their power and to keep a sharp eye on the European interests who had tightened their grip on India's overseas commerce. This was all the more vital when the Europeans showed signs of importing the quarrels into the Indian subcontinent. Example, 1757 Battle of Plassey. But going on. Getting themselves ready to fight each other turned the French and British into local military powers and injected an explosive new element into the volatile political scene of the Mughals. So, I hope this has been helpful. Thank you again for watching.